Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU presents the H3O Art of Life show. Actually, I should have waited till the show's end to give the show the name, because my guest is far more knowledgeable about the subject matter than I am. But I have given it a tentative title of African Philosophy from Theory to Practice. And if that is not what we do, it is because I did not know all the things that I now know about this brother. This is Baba Tyehimba Muntu. He is a faculty member of the Communiversity, the author of 6 books, a percussionist, a craftsman, and heaven knows what else. And so since heaven and Tyehimba, Baba Tyehimba knows what else, I'm going to ask him, what else? Tell us something about you before you tell us something about African philosophy.
Okay, well, to start off with, I'm a master drummer. Now, when you say master drummer, you're not talking about someone who has mastered the drums, someone who deals with the drums spiritually and on a community level that actually involves spirit. I'm a master carver, and I'm a drum carver. So in the United States, I think there are only 3 drum carvers in this country, and I'm one of them. In addition to that, I'm a shaman and a priest. So that's some of the things that I do, as well as write books and teach at the Communiversity and travel and perform. And I have 6 CDs that I've produced. As you mentioned, I have 6 books that I've written. I don't know, I could go on.
Well, you have one here.
Yeah, this is one.
Black Philosophy, Volume 2, so obviously there's a Volume 1.
Actually, Volume 1 I wrote when I was in graduate school, and that was like in 72, 73, and it was going to be my doctoral thesis, but I decided not to use that. So it was actually called African Philosophy, African Nationalism, a Philosophy. I'm sorry. So that was the actual first book, but that was actually going to be my doctoral thesis when I was in graduate school. But I decided not to go that route in that particular area.
I want to just say a little bit about the Communiversity.
Okay.
I remember the early days of the Communiversity. I remember the Communiversity being the thrust of the community. The community realized that it was not getting education at all, that it was getting, I guess I would call it de-education.
Okay.
Because we were not learning about ourselves, we were not learning about our culture and history. And so they took it upon themselves to commandeer a space and then recruit their own teachers. Okay. And fortunately, we had people like yourself in the community who don't have to be told or prodded to study, but who do that as a matter of course on a regular basis. And so when we needed to have teachers come and teach us, they were there. When the students were ready, the teachers appeared. And so that tradition has continued on for this many years, and now you are a member of that faculty at the Communiversity, where those people who have made the love of wisdom an intrinsic part of their lives, of what this is what they do, then you are one of those people who is celebrated for doing that and doing it well.
Thank you.
And I'm very happy to have you here to talk about African philosophy and whatever else you care to include as we go forward. So I'm going to sit still and let you begin where you think you should.
Okay, so to intelligently talk about African philosophy, you have to make a lot of clarifications of what you're actually talking about. So the first thing is to analyze, and again, my background is not dealing with history, I'm dealing with philosophy, which is quite different. And in terms of looking at Africa, or black people, you have to first be clear about who you're talking about. So Africa, of course, we know is a continent. the countries that we're familiar with were actually created by the Europeans as they carved it up during their colonization period. So a lot of the countries that now exist did not exist. Well, none of them actually did. So at that time, you were really talking about different ethnic groups and tribes that were a lot of times thrusted together to make up the countries that the Europeans desired to have for their own profit and interest. So before you really get into explaining African philosophy, you have to be clear about what you're talking about when you say Africa, right? So Africa is, again, a continent with many, many, many countries. That's not as significant as the fact that it has many, many ethnic groups or tribes. So you have to separate nationality from race. So quite often we kind of assume when we say African, we're talking about black. But then on the other hand, you have to really be clear about what that actually means. So as you go on to get into that particular part of the conversation of who are Africans, then it gets into the thing where who are not Africans, and then who are we? Are we Africans or are we not Africans? So you have to separate nationality from race. Obviously, nationality deals with the concept of nation, and you would be foolish to go around calling yourself a Nigerian if you're not from Nigeria. Just in the same way, you would be kind of foolish to be calling yourself something that you're not. But at the same time, you have to be very clear about what it actually means to be a part of the black race or the African race, or being a part of African people. Because a lot of the people on the continent of Africa they're not black. So, I mean, that's kind of the reality of that. So you really have to separate and clarify what you mean when you say black people, then what you mean when you say African people. And unless you're going to be very, very specific about talking about a particular ethnic group, you're going to have to do some major generalizations once you've actually clarified what you're actually talking about. Am I kind of...
No, you go right ahead, because
Okay.
I'm with you.
Okay. So that would be the first thing to do. And in terms of dealing with the whole concept of race, and that's kind of where you go from there, you have to remember European science, the concept of race, up until about 50 or 75 years ago, they only really had 3 basic racial divisions, Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid. Okay, then they expanded it to 5, where they, did some of the Norwegian groups and the other one. And now they've actually expanded it to maybe 25. So interesting enough, the way their science breaks it down, they talk about black Africans, and a lot of people that we would include as being part of that black African, they don't include. For example, they don't consider Ethiopians black Africans. I mean, that's kind of like really odd, but that. Then the San people, that have basically a more brown skin and peppercorn, they're not considered black Africans. Then in other parts of the world, the Aborigines in Australia are not considered black African. Yet, and you would just be surprised how many people are not considered part of being in our race. So once you've clarified that you're not talking about a nationality, then you have to understand that when we talk about African, we're really talking about our race and who we are as black people. So then it gets into another kind of approach. Because, for example, if you understand that there are many, 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 many ethnic groups, which we'll loosely call tribes, and again, we have this negative concept of the word tribes and tribalism. Oh, that's why people kill each other, and this is why we're separated from each other. And in actuality, that's not really the case. Tribalism is a very positive thing because it really recognizes your family. Europeans used tribalism to actually start feuds that they created. And any brother from the continent is clearly proud of his tribe. I mean, this is nothing that you have to be feeling negative about the whole concept of tribalism. Okay, I'm kind of wandering a little bit, but let me just explain again in terms of when you really get into the conversation of race. You have to first recognize who is black and who's not. And I'll compare that to something like if we were going to talk about dogs. So which particular dog are you going to actually talk about to give an example of what a dog is? A Cocker Spaniel or a Great Dane? Using the two extremes. They're all considered dogs, and they're in the basic category of being a dog. So in the same way, you have all these different ethnic groups or racial characteristics that are quite different, but at the same time, we're all under the same umbrella. Okay? So that's the first thing you have to separate and understand that. So as African people, choosing any African person, you can actually pull out what that part of us that is common to all African people. I don't know if that's, you're following that?
No.
Where I'm going so far?
I think I am, and I just want to quote one thing from Malcolm and maybe one thing from Dr. John Henry Clark.
Okay.
Malcolm said, "We are African not because we were born in Africa, but because Africa was born in us. If
Right.
a cat gives birth to kittens in an oven, you don't call them biscuits."
Right.
So we're not biscuit people.
Right.
We are not the people of where we were born. We're not the people of the geography, I
Right.
guess you could say. The other thing is, Dr. John Henry Clark said, and he's not the only one who said it, but he said race is a fraudulent concept. What you have basically is a human race.
Okay.
And then you have all of these divisions, and that's why you can get Europeans going as far as having 25, because they keep subdividing based on characteristics. It's kind of like Linnaeus' system of animal classification. You get some attributes, and then you say every organism that has these attributes belongs to this group.
Right.
And then you have, then you wind up with mammals that have mammals in the sea, and mammals in the air, and mammals with, all kinds of different characteristics that obviously are not,
Right.
don't belong in the group, but because you already predetermined what the attributes of the candidates for that group would be, then they get into that group whether or not they fit the
Okay.
group or not.
Well, the thing that I would say to that is clearly this. To be proud of your family is not to put somebody else's family down.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand that you're proud of who you are
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you're better than anybody else, or doesn't mean that you're going to oppress them or do something bad to them, or you feel that you need to somehow put them in their place, or whatever. So being proud of your group, being proud of your family, your mother, your father, being proud of your brothers, your sisters, then the people in your larger group, that's a positive thing. So we shouldn't assume, and that's something that we do because that's kind of like more of a European approach. I'm this and therefore I'm better than you. As opposed to like, I'm this and proud of it. You really don't have anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of I'm proud of who I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as I'm separating ethnic groups, it's not giving them some one level of superiority over another, and we're better than them or they're better than us. The history of what they've done to us is very clear, and dealing with that reality is something that we have to deal with. But it's not about superiority or one's better than the other. Of course, we're all humans. That's not even a question. in my mind.
Oh, well, it's
Yeah.
a question for Europeans, since we used to be defined as subhumans,
Right.
as savages, as 3/5 of a man.
Right.
So that's a very big issue for us to recognize that we're, being part of the human race has been always a question for Europeans as regards people who
Okay.
are black, African,
Oh, sure.
or non-Europeans,
Okay.
people who are not
Well,
European.
again, that's kind of like their problem. I mean,
Yeah, right,
if you got
true.
a problem because this is the way you look at the world,
Right.
that's kind of like your
Well,
problem.
that's kind of like part of your philosophy, of the
Well,
way you look at the world.
Yeah. Just to be, because now we're moving to the next segment. Once you've recognized black, who's black, you're black, and not for any particular separation for superiority concept. But once you recognize your family and who's in your family, then we might talk about, well, what is actually philosophy? All right?
Okay.
And basically, your philosophy is your way, the way you are, the way you do things, the personality of your people. I mean, that's what it actually comes down to. So you have some general things that all black people are and the way we are. Then we have some specific things that all black people in the U.S. are. We have a particular way that is part of us.
Is that the same as culture?
That's part of culture.
That's part of culture.
That is kind of defined in the culture. Because again, we have a tendency of thinking culture is when you put on the clothes and play the music and
Not
act
I.
a particular way. Well, we in general.
Right.
But in actuality, culture is everything you do, and everything is described. So when you're talking about a philosophy, you're talking about the way of a particular group or people. So one thing you have to separate in terms of dealing with or looking at a philosophy, generally people, the average person hasn't taken time to write or investigate or give it really serious thought to something as complicated as a philosophy, right? This is something that usually comes under the category of organizations, ethnic groups, societies, and then countries and people. So as we talk about our philosophy, in actuality, we really might be talking about our many associations with either our society, our ethnic group, our family, our people, as opposed to me sitting down writing my philosophy. And I guess that's something that I had fun with in graduate school, because very seldom did they question me, because they would have to question my entire philosophy. So it's kind of like, that's just too complicated, But the point I'm getting at is, as we start looking at things that are in common of all African people, all black people, because I kind of use African and black interchangeably, but at the same time of all black people, there are many things that are very much common to us as a people. And again, it's not we're better than them, we're worse than them, or we're better than the Chinese and whatever. We are what we are, and we should be proud of who we are, because we have a lot to be proud of, in terms of that concept. So when you're talking about a philosophy, you're really talking about a personality of a people, and you're talking about a particular way. So it can be broken down in so many categories in terms of, if you looked at it, some very similar to a lot of the traditional philosophical research. So you have these 5 or 6 major areas that Europeans basically consider part of philosophy. So you have like ethics, epistemology, metaphysics, social and political philosophy, and I'm losing one. But I'll get back to all of those. But in terms of how we view ourselves and how we describe our way, we'll find out that we have some things that are very particular to ourselves that really go across the board for all black people, whether we're born in Africa or whether we're born here. So spirituality and religion, that's the other one that I didn't include. So any of those, in this particular book, I do actually talk about all of the different areas that would describe our way, which actually deal with all of those different aspects. So in ethics, for example, you would assume that just deals with some complex way of reasoning, and it actually has to do with the way you think in general, not what you think, but the way you think. And black people have a particular way of thinking, way of reasoning, that is a little bit different from our European counterparts. You know, so we have a way of thinking in terms of religion and spirituality. Religion, of course, is something that's created by people, but black people have spirituality. There's basically the same regardless of what religion we've joined. We have a way of looking at our creation, how we fit into the world, you know, being a part of nature rather than above nature, not having a need to actually control and dominate things around us because we're actually we're more dealing with balance. I mean, this is something that is very common to most black people. So in terms of metaphysics, even in terms of how you deal with how you look at the physical world, we have a particular way of looking at ourselves in the universe and it being as a part of the universe. And again, this is just the way we are as African people, and that's very common to all African people. I'm leaving one out. In terms of epistemology, or the study of knowledge, knowing and the whole concept of science. Most science is very biased, whether as unbiased as they try to make it appear, it's still very biased. And black people, in dealing with spirituality, we have a tendency in terms of philosophy in general of not putting things in little boxes. So therefore, our spirituality is included in our science. The religion, which is really much of a new concept, was not really practiced in Africa itself. We practice spirituality. And most societies, most ethnic groups, didn't even have a word for religion. It was just their daily practices dealing with spirit itself. Some other things that we kind of we assume because we listen to a lot of the stereotypes and the misconceptions that from some of the European scientists. They assume that black people or African people have many, many gods. In most African societies, there's only one supreme God. There's one God. There might be other deities. There might be other entities, but there's really only one God. So that's the idea of one God is very common among most black people, almost anywhere you find us. The concept of spirituality is very common among all black people. You see what I'm saying? So these are some of the concepts that actually make up our particular way or our philosophy. So I could go on about, you know, some of the different aspects about what makes up black philosophy or African philosophy, if you would. And what I did was, especially in this book, I was trying to show how the concepts are pre-colonization. So I talked about, like, for example, the Ghana Empire, which of course was not in Ghana, the country of Ghana. The country of Ghana was named by Kwame Nkrumah to give respect to the Ghana Empire. It was not in the same location. But I was dealing with something like the Ghana Empire and showing how the society actually was set up and how it operated, and the concepts that we had then prior to being colonized, or that was actually only one group, but prior to being colonized and not speaking from something that we were trained to do. So I dealt with them. Then I talked about in Kenya, for example, where you have the Kikuyu. And another major misconception that we have is like all Africans have been there for thousands of years. You had the great migrations that went across Africa around the beginning of, in the early BC. And The Kenyans were, not the Kenyans, but specifically the Kikuyu are considered a Bantu people. And they were part of the people that actually migrated to the space that they're actually in 500 or 600 years ago. So they haven't actually been there thousands of years. We have a lot of misconceptions about the concept of that. But pre-colonization, Kenya, well, it wasn't Kenya then. Interesting how even the country of Kenya got its name. You know,
How did they get their name?
it was really funny. A guy was leading this European across the countryside, and the European pointed to the land area, and he said, "What is that called?" And he thought he was pointing to a gourd. A gourd is actually called Kenya, and that's how it got its name,
Okay.
Kenya.
Okay.
So, I mean, interesting how some of the things actually developed in different ways. But in looking at how the different societies were operated pre-colonization, you can understand that we had a lot of our ways long before we were colonized, enslaved, moved to other places, taught to be a particular way. And in spite of all the bizarre behavior that we have today, we still have basically the same African philosophy. And that's kind of like the whole pretense, not the pretense, but the conclusions that are kind of reached from the book itself, that we have a particular philosophy or way as a people. And we all understand pretty much what that way is, because all black people, whether they are Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, whatever, we all know kind of what it means, how to act in a certain way, and we treat each other a particular way. We know what the rules are and kind of what the order is in a bigger way. So that would actually be part of our personality. That is expressed in our culture, and therefore would be the bigger foundation of what you would call our philosophy.
What then would you say African philosophy is?
African philosophy is the way of the people of us, the Africans, or the black people.
So that's everything they do.
Everything that we do, it includes how we describe ourselves, but it also includes what we actually do. It has these basic concepts that deal with how we look at the universe, how we look at ourselves, how we interact as a people, how we learn and are socialized. It has all the different aspects of that. Just like, for example, if you were going to deal with, in looking at an average ethnic group or society, one more ethnic group than a society, most African people have what they call a creation story. The creation story describes how they came to be. And they talk about their relationship to God, their creator, the land, the universe, everything around it. So that's kind of like describing who they are as a people. Now, as black people here in this country, we have, in spite of being Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and whatever else we choose to get into, we still have this same understanding that how we actually came to be. You know, and most black people don't even think about it. I mean, it's something that you take so much for granted that you don't really give it a whole lot of thought in terms of that. But it's something that if you kind of review the things that you were trained and taught by your parents, you know, in different black settings, black institutions, a lot of our philosophy might be found in a lot of our, not so much folk tales, but our proverbs. You know, I mean, we have a lot of that in that. I mean, it actually explains a lot of the concepts that make up how we think and our actual way.
You know, when you said thinking about, you know, we know things about ourselves, it's intuitive.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be taught. And I know that, you know, we always think of ourselves as children of God.
Yeah.
God made us.
God created.
And God created us. And so we think of ourselves as children of God, and the only begotten Son doesn't get in the way of that, because we are children of God, and the only begotten Son is the only begotten Son, and that's okay with us.
Right.
The interesting thing about that is how the Europeans describe how we came to be, and that has to do in the Christian version with the Hamitic myth. You know, that the sons of Ham, the sons of Noah looked upon him in his nakedness after the flood, and he had too much wine and he got drunk and was lying out naked, and other sons walked in the room backward to avoid looking upon his nakedness, but Ham saw him and apparently ridiculed him, and so he was cursed. Okay. Noah cursed him and all generations following him, and made them drawers of water and hewers of wood. And so Europeans decided that is where black people came from. We are not the result of a blessing, not the result of a divine act, but the result of a curse because of our misbehavior. And so to have a people look upon you as though you are, you know, except for your misbehavior, you might have been not black. You know, your blackness is a curse, right. And therefore that there's something wrong with that. We think it's fine because God made us, and God obviously wanted us to be black. Right. And so we are quite happy with the fact that God has made us, and we are children of God, and we are black, and we never felt cursed at all, and we never saw a contradiction between God having only one child and God having all of us. Yeah. And we never saw ourselves as stepchildren or anything less than children of God. And we do that, we don't even have a conversation about it. Right. That's pretty much a general thing that you will find if you have a conversation with any black person. They will finally tell you that they're a child of God. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that I know is common among us. And I always like the notion that, you know, religion is the organized form of some kind of practice. I don't know how people can think that African people or black people existed in the world for millions of years without any spiritual ideas. Oh, yeah. You simply could not coexist with what else was in the world, because if you were living in areas where there was ample wildlife, then certainly you had to know how to live in harmony with nature. Right. Because otherwise the lions and tigers and all of the other carnivores would have already devoured you, and you wouldn't still be on the planet. Right. So it's interesting, our ways of looking at the world enable us to be in the world despite the stories that are told about us to us.
Right. Yeah. And just touching a little bit more about the religion, you know, personally, I don't have a problem with black people being whatever religion they want to be, because 90% of what they do in religion is really just all about fellowship. It's a place where they get together and they practice parts of their spirituality. The average black person is not a theologian, don't really study the religion. They'll go along with who's ever preaching whatever, but it's all about the sermon. It's all about being together with all the other black people that are there.
And the singing.
The singing, the fellowship, and everything that's going on with it. So there's nothing negative about that. I mean, I used to enjoy watching these churches when they, I remember going to a funeral one time where it was 3 or 4 different preachers and they were going to out-preach each other. And I'm like, this is a show. And then in the middle of the sermon, they break into a song. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm like, whoa, this is really something. Mm-hmm. But again, a lot of the things that we do that we quite often get into this thing of being purist about, well, black people shouldn't be religious and you know. That's part of spirituality, is a part of who we are. Mm-hmm. You know, in terms of religion, which one you choose to join, as long as it's not taking you from reality to the point where you don't know who you are and not appreciating yourself and your family, there's nothing negative about it. I mean, that's the way I look at it. So I don't have a problem with Muslims or Christians or whatever. I mean, if they still know who they are, they still practice their family, dealing with their family and working with their family and doing things that are related to family. Because again, we get into so much trying to be giving these concepts and words, and you know, like the lecture that I gave Saturday, in terms I was dealing with Pan-Africanism, and then I was dealing with black nationalism, and then explaining Garveyism, and comparing the three, you know, in terms of how it evolved and how things actually operate. Interesting enough how Garvey in some ways was considered a Pan-Africanist. He was considered a black nationalist. But the whole thing was, what he was trying to do was really dealing with black people. It was kind of prior to the concepts being formulated. And anytime you get into too much trying to talk about this is the right concept, that's the wrong concept, this is the right religion, that's the wrong religion, this is the right political stance, and that's the wrong one, and you lose the concept of loving your family and your people, that's when you really got a problem with it.
You know, when you mentioned the Kikuyu, I read Facing Mount Kenya by
Right.
Jomo Kenyatta, and one of the things that impressed me was that the East Africans were very, and when I say that, it's not because I'm saying that the East Africans were different from the West Africans or the South Africans or any other Africans on the continent. It's just that that's where I saw this. That's where this impressed me, because I know that that, you know, we talk about the corporate values, which meant that all African people had some values that they shared. They didn't necessarily practice them
Right.
in the same way, but you could see them. Sheikh Anta Diop talked about the cultural unity of Black Africa, saying that they didn't do the same thing the same way, but they did many of the things that they did for the same reason, because they valued
exactly.
the same thing. But the one thing that really impressed me was their abhorrence of the notion of the individual, because you needed to recognize that your existence was interrelated with the existence of others.
Right.
In other words, you were not some entity in and of yourself, independent of all other things, and you could
Right.
do whatever you chose to do without any concern or regard for the impact that would have on others.
Right.
And they did everything in their culture was designed to inculcate the notion of your being as a part of a whole,
Community.
as
and
a
people.
part of a community,
Yep.
which is what I think that our people seek when they keep formulating little groups of people that they call churches, because we are going to come together. We are going to coalesce. We want to be independent in a lot of ways. We want to be autonomous in a lot of ways, but we don't want to be separate and apart
Right.
from all other things. So when you mention being proud of who you are, being proud of your family, being
Right.
proud of your tribe, being proud of the group that you're in, we all want to come together. But when we get into a group that then wants to exclude other groups and wants
That's
to say
not an
these
African way.
people are not saved,
Right. That's
you
not
know,
an African way.
that's not an African way.
Yeah.
And when we are operating against our own best interest, because it is not in our best interest to be separate, to be individuals. It is in our best interest always to be a part of a group, and especially a group that is functioning, that is positive, that is building, that is growing, that is developing, that is balanced. You know, to be a part of that is a blessing, and it's a privilege.
Right.
And it's something to be sought.
Well, the concept of individuality, that's a little more European in nature. You know, and again, as I'm looking at it again, I'm pro-black. I'm not I don't care about white people. I mean, in terms of like putting them down isn't something that I'm interested in. I'm interested in us being elevated ourselves so that we can elevate ourselves to where we need to be. So again, the whole concept of individualism, that's something that's developed by them, you know, and that's something we need to leave
The
alone.
rugged individual is one of their...
Rugged individual,
yes.
Yep, John Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, so much of this society is just moving on, even taking that to a higher and higher level. Yeah, I mean, even you look now how the science with the technology that they're doing, and the people are into their cell phones and their computers, and they rather text than talk.
Mm-hmm.
They rather be by themselves and look at something by themselves rather than being in groups. You know, this is something that is really, really being promoted by the society.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's not a African way either. That's not a black way. I mean,
Well,
you know,
you're
in terms of us
easier
getting
to
together.
control when you can be separated.
Yep.
You know, and when what is going into your mind is coming from sources that are outside of your group, outside of your experience, outside of everything.
Yep.
It's being filtered in and has no relationship to your reality.
Right.
So your reality becomes distorted. It becomes unreality, and you begin to think and behave in ways that are foreign or that are alien to you.
Right.
And so then you become someone else.
So some of the concepts we kind of touched on a little bit, like the whole thing of being a community-minded rather than individual-minded.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's part of our way.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the concept of utility, where we'll use something and make the best of everything that we got with it. You know, I mean, making something work. The concept of not putting everything in little boxes, everything is interrelated. You know, that's something that's very common among all African people. So a spiritual item is just as important as the chair that you're sitting in. The chair might be a spiritual item. You see what I'm saying? So in actuality, those are some of the concepts that are part of our African way, which is part of who we are as black people also.
I think that this hierarchy, not only putting things in boxes and separating things very often artificially,
Yep.
you know, because one of the things I know that you found is that things belong in more than one box.
Yeah. You're part of many groups. and
Right,
many-
so
many things.
if you put it in this box, then you need to make a copy of it so you can have a copy of it to go into that other box where it also belongs. And then when you get it in that box, you find out you need to make another copy because
go in
there's
the other
another
box.
box. Because that's the problem with filing things
Yep.
according to attributes, as though everything has only a single attribute.
Right.
Human beings are very complex.
Oh, for
Life
sure.
is very complex.
Yep.
The whole of it is very complex, and you cannot categorize things, you know, by separate. In fact, when they say think outside the box, because if you keep operating in boxes, eventually you can't solve any of your problems.
Right. It's-
So
everything
you
is
have to get out of your box.
Right.
But the hierarchy, the organizing races into, you know, the lower races and the upper races, you know, organizing living things
Right.
into things that are lower, you know, the single-celled amoeba, all the way up to the more complex human being, and then you get to the human being and you start deciding hierarchy according to color. And then, you know, when you get without color, when you get to the point at which you're white and lacking melanin, then you're the king of the hill. So that, you know, so now that you have assumed this identity, then you have to struggle and fight all your life to keep that which is not inferior to you from showing you up. Yeah. Because that which is not inferior to you will keep doing things that make you look not superior. And so your quest has always got to be to keep those inferiors in their place so that they won't elevate themselves. You got to elevate themselves to a level where they seem equal to you. Right. It's a real hard thing, because the Gikuyu had a very wonderful system of classifying things. They would say, instead of talking about black people or yellow people or red people, they would say the people who live by the sea. Okay. They could distinguish themselves, the people who hunt, the people who fish. Yeah. These were all people. Yeah. Well, and they did different things and lived in different places, but yeah, they were people.
When you think about it, in terms of the earlier black people, I mean, before the Europeans showed up, there was no need to talk about race. I mean,
well,
you know,
what race was there?
Exactly, there was no need. I mean, right. It was like, why would we talk about dividing people, you know, other than somebody coming from a different area or looking different or whatever.
Yeah, the people who fish.
Yep. So there you go. So interesting enough, that's kind of the concept of using it as a point of separation is basically more of a European thing. As I mentioned over and over, the concept I see as race is recognizing your family and being proud of it to elevate us as a group. And elevate don't mean put somebody else down as a group, to elevate us to be good as a group, as a people. So again, it's nothing to do with, it really ain't got nothing to do with them. You know what I mean? It's about us being happy with who we are and making ourselves better. Yep.
Which makes up all the sense in the world. The thing is that if you were in a context where some people believe everything is about them, you know, then whatever you do that is not about them, whatever you do somehow is ascribed to having something to do with them. When you are simply over here doing the things that you do because it is your nature to do the things that you do, to prefer the things that you prefer, to eschew the things that you don't particularly want or need. It isn't about you. You know, when they were trying to call some African communities classless societies. Well, if class was not a consideration, it was not about class. So how are you going to call something classless when class was never a consideration? Well, so stop trying to give people your philosophy and make them participate in it when they are not participating in it.
Let me speak to that just a little bit, because in most societies, most African societies, there is a concept of class. But again, it's not a negative class thing, because people are very much kind of like when you think about apprenticed. You know, if your father was a carpenter, you would be a carpenter, and they recognize that. That doesn't mean you can't be anything else.
Well, I'm thinking about class in the sense of superior and inferior.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's, you got to keep separating again. In many African societies, people are proud to be in the group that they're in.
Exactly.
So, but it's not a put down, you know what I mean?
But you're in that group because you have this responsibility, or you have this level of development. You're an elder. Right. You know, not just because you grew old, but because you also grew wise, and also because you assume responsibility for certain behavior and certain responsibilities that you take on. So there are differences and distinctions, and you can call them class if you want to, but
Yeah.
they're not because somebody is better than
Well,
somebody or
again,
somebody is higher than
even in this
someone else.
book, I do a lot of definitions to actually be clear about what you're talking about. You know, I mean, just like using the concept of class, where they would assume that class just means I'm better than you and you're worse than me,
It's
and
all about your
therefore to
betters.
put you down. In terms of really just separation because of groups that operate on different levels, that's not a negative thing. Okay, so that I talk about quite a bit in this book, you know, I mean, in terms of making clear on definitions of things like that. And again, you're not using stuff to actually put people in negative attitudes.
Because you don't need to.
You don't have to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? We could be here a while.
Okay.
We scratch the surface. They keep flashing little signs at me telling me we have a minute.
Oh.
I'm going to let you have that minute.
Okay. Well, more than anything, in terms of dealing with African philosophy, is to understand, one, we're talking about us as a people. We're talking about us as a group. We have to recognize that we are black, we're African, even though we have, a lot of people have this misconception, oh, you have light-skinned people because they were integrated into black and da-da-da. We had the largest integration of tribes when we were brought to this country than any other group. And that's why we're so different. In my family, I have every color you can imagine. You know what I'm saying? But the whole biggest thing, the point in terms of talking about African philosophy is, one, recognizing that we are a group, that we do have a way that's particular to ourselves. We should be proud of who we are. We should operate and move as a family and move forward in that family concept. That's the most important thing, rather than getting stuck into all these titles and political concepts and theories and things of that nature. That, I think, more than anything, would be the message that, if I were to give a message, that I would like people to get. You know, be a part of the family that you are.
Well, I thank you so much, Baba Tyehimba, for being my guest today and for making me aware of just how wide, how broad your perspective is.
Okay.
And I look forward to having you again as my guest.
Okay.
And I hope you will consent to come.
Okay.
And I will also want to congratulate you or compliment you for the beautiful work you do in the community, especially around special occasions when you are the master drummer that we see on all of those special occasions.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming.
Okay.
And thank you for rescuing this show, because I thought we had